Subscribe. What does modern psychology tell us about the reliability of hadiths? He believes that for Islam to emerge in its correct form, hadiths must undergo rigorous scrutiny. This is because many elements within hadiths contradict the Quran, reason and logic. We also find this approach of criticizing hadiths to protect the Prophet from slander in Abu Hanifa. Fakhr al-Din al-Razi would be disturbed and we would dismiss it. This is not new. However, today I want to draw attention to a new issue here. I should have mentioned this earlier. This is psychological research conducted in the modern era. Psychological research conducted in the modern era shows that it is not possible for hadiths to be transmitted orally and preserved accurately. This is true even when the transmission is done with entirely good intentions. That is, within single-chain hadiths, there are deliberate fabrications. Some fabricated hadiths to benefit Islam, some to harm Islam, some to prove their school of thought correct, some to support political leaders, and some for their material gain. Indeed, books on hadith history state that such fabrications exist. However, the issue I will discuss today cannot be found in books on hadith history. This is because the research I will present was conducted particularly in the 20th and 21st centuries in the field of modern technology. And one of these, for example, was a study conducted as follows. In 1986, the Challenger exploded. Psychologists saw this as an opportunity and decided to examine how well people could preserve their memories. 1 or 2 days after the Challenger exploded, they asked people, where were you when you heard about this explosion? They recorded what these people said. Then they found the same individuals again and asked them the same questions as before. Where were you when you heard it exploded? Look, we are talking about 2.5 years. After 2.5 years, the percentage of those who gave the correct answer was not even 50%. It was around 43%. In contrast, when asked, how confident are you in your answer? 80% said, we are confident. Look, after 2.5 years had passed. Therefore, remember that the famous hadith books we have were written in the 3rd century. They were put into writing more than 200 years after the Prophet's passing. Some researchers today claim there were written hadith sheets and they were also consulted. However, the writing of hadith sheets also occurred many years after the Prophet's passing. Moreover, even if some material was transmitted from hadith sheets to books like Bukhari, Muslim and Abu Dawud, it could only be a very small portion. Furthermore, since the authors of hadith books did not state, we consulted a hadith sheet if we trust their words, and for some books we must trust every word to see their methodology, then they must not have taken much from some of these sheets. Now, other modern studies in the field of psychology show the following. Individuals transmitting oral culture alter many things according to their emotional state at the moment and the expectations of the audience. And again, researchers from Harvard University went to a place in Yugoslavia where oral cultural transmission was very common. There they found a minstrel who recited poems from the Ashik tradition. They asked him to recite a specific poem. The minstrel recited a poem of over 12,000 couplets to them. After a few years, they found the same minstrel again and asked him to recite the same poem. Indeed, the minstrel who had recited a poem of 12,000 couplets now recited over 8,000 couplets. After another short period, they went to the minstrel once more. This time, the poem was as long as the previous one. When asked if he had recited the same thing, he said he had. Even the expectations of the audience and the emotional state at that moment can create such a large difference in people who transmit oral culture. Another study is that conducted by anthropologist Can Vansina in Rwanda. I believe it was between 1935 and 1960. Here, Vansina examines the following. There is someone who witnessed the event, then someone who transmitted it, then another person, and finally someone who wrote it down. He investigates how well the event was preserved among these transmitters until it was written down. He observes that at each stage, the person adds something of their own, and in the end, a significantly different event is written down. There is a tremendous difference between the first witness and the one who writes it down. In fact, most of us have witnessed this while playing Chinese whispers in childhood. When playing Chinese whispers, one person says a word, as you know. After it passes through 7 or 8 people, the last person says something completely different. It makes someone do something, and this event passes in 3 to 5 minutes. That is, even within 3 to 5 minutes, a significant difference can arise in oral transmission. Consider for yourselves at home what could happen to material transmitted orally for over 200 years, as in Al-Sakhawi's example. In another instance, there was Frederick Bartlett. He conducted a study with Cambridge University students. They read a story twice, then he asked them to engage in other activities for 30 minutes. Afterward, they wrote the story. Here we saw that the students understood quite different things from the story. And gentlemen, you would expect Cambridge University students to understand what they read, but you see that what they understood in terms of meaning could be quite different. This shows transmitting something by meaning can create serious problems. Let us not forget that the hadith collections we have were transmitted by meaning, meaning they reflect how individuals interpreted what the Prophet saw. And rather than individuals' interpretations, it's how the transmitters in between interpreted what a certain person saw, added on top of how they interpreted it. With the combination of potential memory issues, this was written down in this century and stands before us as a disparate structure. In another psychological study, subjects are shown an 18-minute film. After the film ends, they are asked about events that were not recorded in what they watched. When asked about non-existent events insistently 8 weeks later, nearly 50% report them as if they had occurred. And this shows that if there are expectations from you in society, people can imagine and report non-existent events. They can interpret non-existent events as if they were real and write new scenarios. If we consider that in the 3rd century, when hadiths were collected, many people had expectations tied to their schools of thought, expectations tied to politics, and expectations due to their own cultures, and that hadiths were written down in such an environment, we can say that this is one of the important sources of existing problems. In short, when we examine the content of hadiths, seeing that hadiths contradict the Quran, reason and human nature is sufficient to say that there are many fabrications within them and sufficient to say that it is impossible for our Prophet to have said these things. And as I mentioned earlier, we also know from hadith history that there were many deliberate reasons for fabrication in hadiths. But if we set all of this aside and look at the method of how hadiths were transmitted, there is material transmitted orally for over 200 years, and then it is written down. Even if hadiths were written down using this method with entirely good intentions, the modern college research I discussed earlier says that it is inevitable for there to be many fabrications within hadiths written down using this method. This is what we must consider when evaluating hadith literature. Unfortunately, I see that those who claim to be concerned with hadith methodology have never encountered such a critique and have not seriously confronted it. Subscribe